Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre says hitting pause on the fuel excise tax isn't enough. He's calling on Prime Minister Carney to pause all federal fuel taxes for the rest of the year. But in question period today, the Prime Minister shut that down.
We are recycling all the excess revenues from higher oil prices to Canadians. What we are not doing is what the Leader of the Opposition is proposing, which is to substantially increase the deficit, something he's regularly against, by more than $3 billion, because this government can count, Mr. Speaker. This government can count.
What he is not doing is increasing the deficit. It's only up by 100% since he took office, Mr. Speaker. Does he even read his own budget?
Well, we're just under 2 weeks from finding out just how big that deficit actually is when the Liberals table their spring fiscal and economic update. We'll get a clearer picture of how new shocks like the Iran war have shaped Canada's economy. The budget presented back in November, the first under Prime Minister Mark Carney, projected a $78.3 billion deficit for this fiscal year, and that was before the war broke out, driving up fuel costs across the country and around the world. We're going to bring in Kevin Page. He's the former parliamentary budget officer and president and CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. Kevin Page, always good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Well, what's your sense of the trajectory these finances could be on, given what's happening with the war and what it's done to the economic outlook here?
Yeah, I don't think we're off course yet, David, in terms of that trajectory that we saw just late last fall in November. I think the deficit that you showed up on the screen, $78 billion, I think will come in below that. That's about 2.5 percentage points of GDP, the size of our economy. I think, it's important. I think the government realizes that they hit their fiscal target for 2028-29 of something called an operating balance, which would bring that deficit down to, below $60 billion. And that entire deficit would be capital related. So I think the pressure is still there, notwithstanding these increased downside risks because of the war in the Middle East.
You think they're going to have a better deficit picture, better than the $78.3 billion? What would be the cause of that?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors, David. Like the economy it's very weak. It is a little bit stronger than what they had assumed in the fall budget. I think the actual Budget Implementation Act was only passed just literally weeks ago. So I don't think a lot of the spending that they were hoping to get out the door are not going to get out the door. Is it going to be significantly below the $70 billion? Probably not, but I think it will be below. And again, in the context of what we're seeing in deficits in the United States and in Europe, it's and from a bond rating perspective, I think people will still see it as is kind of moderate in terms of a size of a deficit.
Well, I'm not questioning your assessment, but the caveat I would add is that would presume there are no new spending measures, right? And sometimes, as you and I know, because we talk in the budget lockups and the fiscal economic updates, the Liberals, when they get a little bit of extra money, have rolled that into new spending. What's your sense of what we might see with the Carney government and their first spring economic statement on that?
I think that, the pressure to deal with the affordability issues, the housing issues are significant. They're very, they're like the top priorities of Canadians. I think so. It's not really surprising to see, political leaders, in Canada and really elsewhere to try to deal with it. I think energy prices are going to hurt consumers that much more. They're going to elevate food prices. So this is going to be ongoing. Again, I think we'll see the tally in terms of what the measures that the additional measures on housing and food, with the increase in the GST credit, how much they amount to. But yeah, I don't, will there be significantly more measures? I think, going back to the power panel, I think the pressure is going to really shift on the government to move, really start to show how they're executing on that agenda.
Yeah.
So this update, in addition to additional economic and fiscal numbers, we need to see from a mid-year update, like how are they really, what does it look like over the next number of months in terms of these capital investments and additional spending for D&D, Department of National Defense.
But you're trying to do this fiscal update and implement the plan that you're elected to implement, but it is shock after shock after shock driven by the United States, right? The trade shock shock last year, the oil shock of the moment, right, because of what's happening in Iran. How does that affect your ability to do a credible and clear fiscal update because of all of the uncertainty in that?
Well, I think you have to plan around scenarios. I don't, it's hard to have any confidence in any one scenario. Again, back to your power panel, where will oil prices be 4 weeks from now? 2 months from now, come the fall. It's really hard to predict that. We just got a recent World Economic Outlook from the International Monetary Fund.
Yep.
Again, what you see there is many different scenarios, including adverse scenarios. So yeah, I think we're going to need to see that complete planning picture from the government.
It's interesting. I remember a budget scenario from a few years back as we were coming out of the COVID lockdowns and still dealing with all of the inflation and the uncertainty and the supply chain tangles, that one of the negative scenarios saw an increase in government revenue in the short term because of a surge in oil prices. And the reality is the federal government will make money because of what's happening with the oil price, but over time that would weaken the economy quite drastically. The ability to pay for things like the excise tax relief and stuff, it seems to me, Kevin Page, that there's going to be enough there from extra oil money to cover that and maybe a little bit more. What's your read on how that affects the revenue short term?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we heard that from the Prime Minister as well. I think there is a sense, again, there is all this uncertainty in terms of how long this oil price shock will go. But that, again, even the latest numbers we got from the International Monetary Fund, they did not, significantly change the economic projections for Canada, notwithstanding this oil price shock, which was going to hurt other countries significantly. We are an energy exporter, so some provinces in Canada are going to do well. Some corporations are going to do well. But yeah, it's going to be that pinch on consumers, on their disposable income is going to increase. So, there's some pluses and some minuses. But yeah, I think on a net basis, probably, the government should be able to pay for, the reduction in excise taxes on fuel and on diesel, just, through the higher revenues because of higher commodity prices. Yeah,
the IMF is projecting 1.5% GDP growth for Canada in 2026. It's second in the G7 only to the United States at 2.3. The euro area is like 1.1 on aggregate. So it's not great growth, but it's better than the alternatives. Kevin Page, I guess as a final point, I mean, I assume you're going to be in the budget, the lockup as we get the briefing and the early look at the spring economic statement. What's the big thing you're going to be looking for? What's the number one indicator that you're going to be eyeing for to give you a sense of where they see this thing going?
Well, I mean, can they, because of all these changes and because of the, this heightened uncertainty, the uncertainty is probably at least as high or even higher than it was when the government literally won that election almost a year ago. To the date. So, again, how are they going to paint that planning picture? Are they going to, maintain that commitment to an operating balanced budget come 2028-29? Are they prepared to actually take certain fiscal measures to make sure we get to that operating balance? And that could mean a second round of spending reallocations.
Right.
And what we didn't see in the last budget was really a set of numbers that for the Department of National Defense, what does that spending increase look like, over the next 5 years? So we need a little bit more transparency on that side.
Yeah, because those numbers are going to get really large as that ramps up to the 3.5% of GDP. And as the Prime Minister himself said in announcing it, it will force the federal government to choose what it can and can't do at some point. So that you're dead right on that. That trajectory will matter. Kevin Page, I know we had technical issues getting connected. We appreciate everybody pushing through. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. That's Kevin Page, former parliamentary budget officer. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure.